Hey guys, it's Miss Landry, and today we are going to go over inference and observation. So we're going to talk about why this is so important in science. Some of you guys have probably heard of the scientific method, and you know that observation is step number one. And I hate calling them steps because they're really not steps. It's a process. But observation is super important. So let's take a look at what we're going to learn in this video. First of all, I definitely want you to be able to compare and contrast between observation and inference. They are very different, and you need to know the differences and how they're the same. Secondly, I want you to be able to identify observations and inferences. So whether I give you a picture or a statement, you need to be able to identify, is this an observation or am I inferring something? And then finally, I really want you to be able to verbalize and explain why these are so important in science and why science is basically an observational science. Like it's so important. So we'll come back to those learning objectives at the end and review and make sure that we touched on all of them. So let's talk about why we observe. Humans tend to be very visual, but we do have more than one sense. And from the time that we're babies, we are observing the world, right? Like we're putting things in our mouth and we're touching things and we're trying to figure out the world around us, and we do that through observation. Okay, so I want you to think about the fact that here's a bumblebee. You guys are probably scared of bees, but bees are very important. So take a look at that bumblebee and kind of think about some observations you could make about that bumblebee. I might look at it and I might say, wow, he's really prettily colored. Or, wow, I never knew bumblebees were so fuzzy because he has a lot of hair. Things like that, right? So then I might say to myself, well, why does he have so much hair? That's kind of weird. Like, why does a bumblebee have to be hairy? So now take a look at this second picture, and I look at this picture and say, wow, he is covered in pollen. And so I then put these observations together and I come up with the why question. Like, why is this happening? Why is a plant shaped the way it is? Why does a molecule interact with this other molecule? Why does this disease cause these symptoms? I cannot get to the question or the why until I come up with these observations. So observing the world around you is super important, and the why is what makes you a scientist. So I hope that through this year, you start to really look at things around you and think, gosh, why is that happening? Because that is science. So let's talk about observation to start. The definition for observation is here on the, I'm going to write some stuff. It's here, the action or process of observing something carefully in order to gain information. So this is key right here, right? So we're gaining information about the world around us. This is where we figure out the why, okay? So there are two types of observation. I don't know why this isn't working. I got to go back to my cursor. Hang on. So the first one is, oops, sorry, bear with me, guys. There we go. A lot of times when you're just kind of starting out, you tend to use your senses to observe, right? You look at things, you touch things, you smell things, you taste things, hopefully not in the lab. But those are what we call qualitative observations. And those are just as important as the other kind of observation, which is quantitative. So quantitative observations are basically data that we collect, right? Like I might measure how tall someone is or their weight. I might count how many kids I have in the class. I might watch a plant to see how many bubbles it produces over time. These are quantitative observations, and they're just as important as qualitative. So throughout this course, you will be making both types of observations. Now, I want you to pause the video, and in your journal, I want you to write the word observation, and I want you to write down 3 observations about this bumblebee picture. So go ahead and pause the video, do that. You can also answer them in Edpuzzle, but I need them also in your journal for class tomorrow. Okay, next, oops, let's clear that. I'm not sure how to do that. I'll just leave it there. So inference is different than an observation. So an observation is just using your senses or counting or measuring. But an inference is that jump from what I saw and adding what I know, okay? So it's a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. Now, what I like about this definition, right, is that it it gets to the point that we're using prior knowledge or prior experiences, and then we're adding logic to it to come up with what we think is happening. Okay, so this can be used to make predictions about the past, the present, and future events. It also aims to explain what is happening in the observation. It tries to get at the why. So if you think about it, science is a science of inference, right? And then we use experimentation to deduce if our inference was correct. So inference and deduction, all that stuff is in there. All right, so let's take a look at an example of inference. So here's a cat, and I don't know if you can see in this red circle here, there is a broken vase. That was kind of handy. And there's a cat. So those are observations. I'm observing what's in there. There's one cat. He's orange. The vase is pink, blah, blah, blah. But the inference that I could make about this was that the cat broke the vase. Now, I can do that based on my knowledge of cats. I know that cats tend to knock things over. I know cats are curious. And using logic, I come up with the inference that the cat broke the vase. So that's an example of an inference. So I want you to pause the video again after you answer the questions in Edpuzzle and write 2 inferences about this bee picture, the one with all the pollen stuck to the bee. Why does that happen? Why is the bee fuzzy? Why is the pollen there? Okay, so I want you to come up with 2 inferences on that picture. So go ahead and pause and do that. So now let's practice a little bit. Okay, so in your journal, here is oops, went too far. Here is a picture of my favorite comic, which is Calvin and Hobbes. I want you to make 3 observations and 3 inferences. You'll do both on Edpuzzle and in your journal because we'll share these in class. But I want you to go ahead and do that on this video, so pause the video and make those inferences and observations. Okay, one more practice for you. Here's another picture. 3 observations. There's a lot you can observe in this picture. And then I want you to infer 3 things about what might have happened in this picture. If you can only come up with 1 or 2, that's fine, but I just want you to practice. And then finally, so going back, go ahead and pause the video and do that in your journal as well as on the Edpuzzle video. And then finally, the last kind of practice is identifying whether it is an observation or an inference. So in your journal, I would like you to make this table. So you're going to make a table that says observation or inference. And then I have 8 statements. All you have to do is put the number. You don't necessarily have to put the whole statement. So I'll show you. I'm going to look at that first sentence. There are 18 students in the class. Okay, that is not an inference. I might say an inference to that could be it's a small class, right? Because I'm looking at sizes of classes and my previous knowledge. But because I'm just counting 18 students, this is an observation. And even more specifically, it's a quantitative observation. So number 1 would go under observation in my journal. So that's it for this video. Let's just really quickly go back to all of our learning objectives and make sure that we have hit all 3 of them. Hopefully you can compare and contrast with the definitions between the 2 and how to do them. You can absolutely identify observations and inferences. That was our last slide. And then you're able to identify why they're so important. It's that why of science, right? So getting to the why, that is what will make you a scientist. I mean, besides being in our class. So, thanks, guys. Have a fantastic day.